The Camino de Santiago, or Way of St. James in English, is a network, actually, of ancient paths. And they begin in a variety of locations all over Europe. And the one thing they have in common is that they all end in Santiago de Compostela in the northwestern corner of Spain, specifically at the cathedral where the remains of Jesus's apostle, St. James of Zebedee, are believed to be buried. Now, the stories and the legends that surround how St. James's remains came to be there are very interesting, colorful, complex, but they would take far more time than I think either one of us or any of our listeners really want me to today. But if anyone is really interested in those very, very early beginnings, thousands of years ago, all you have to do is search on origins of the Camino, and you will get chapter and verse about the founding and the creation of the Camino. But I think what you need to know now is that it's enough to say that Christians in medieval times, let's say around the 10th century, believed that by walking to Santiago, and the Spanish verb for walk is caminar. So I walk is camino. So by walking to Santiago, they were paying homage at the grave of St. James in a way that would earn them grace and forgiveness for their sins.
Oh, okay.
So that was the original thought. And I would say thousands of pilgrims did that each year. But it wasn't until 1492 when add the Camino de Santiago to the two other great world pilgrimages, which were from one's home to Jerusalem or from one's home to Rome. And so suddenly the Camino de Santiago was one of the three big pilgrimages. And it was important back then for people who had committed crimes to do things and to pay for in restitution. And so walking this way was a way to do that and to thus earn their entrance into heaven. So that's how it started a long time ago. And I mean, the origins were religious in nature, but over the century, people's reasons for walking the different paths of the Camino have changed a lot. Now, I think the last thing I checked, which were numbers from 2020, and of course the Camino, like everything else, took a hit during the pandemic as many things were closed, but almost 300,000 people. I walked what they call the French route, the Camino Francis. It's the longest at about 500 miles or nearly 800 kilometers. And it's the most popular one. So about 80% of the people who walk, the pilgrims are what we're still called, whether your reasons for going are religious or not. But about 80% of pilgrims actually choose the Camino Francis. And that's the one that I walked.
Is there a specific reason why you picked that part, or why most people pick that part?
I think one of the main reasons is that the infrastructure along the Francis is better than other places.
Okay.
And I think this would probably be a good time to point out that there are parts of the Camino that are very much like a hike, but more it's a walk. It goes through big cities. It goes along major highways. It goes behind the Pamplona McDonald's, which I know doesn't make it sound very interesting, but I mean, this path is at least thousands of years old. Some people believe that it's overtopped the ancient Roman road. So There's no way of knowing, but it is really old. You do find, more places to eat, more places to sleep and stay, more places to get help if you need it. There is a route called the Primitivo, which is exactly that. And you probably are carrying, just like maybe you would on the Appalachian Trail, you're carrying something to make your own food, a place to sleep outdoors, those types of things. So the reason I chose the Francis is that I am hardly what most people would call an outdoors person. I was 62 years old when I decided to walk 500 miles by myself. So I thought it made sense to kind of stay on the beaten track for obvious reasons. So that's why I chose the Camino Francis route.
500 miles definitely is not something I would call a vacation. So what motivated you to take this trip?
Well, that is an interesting question, and one that is still hard for me to answer, because some people say, well, sometimes you choose a trip and sometimes the trip chooses you. And in this case, because it was so outside my comfort zone and outside what I would normally do, I kind of have to say, corny as it sounds, that the Camino chose me. And it started, I was watching a movie called The Way, which some people have heard of. It was written by actor-director Emilio Estevez, and it starred his real-life father, Martin Sheen. It was released about 10 years ago. And it's a fascinating story. It's fiction, but it's based on fact. And I was just taken with this movie. I absolutely loved it. I can't tell you more than that, because I really hope that if you haven't seen it, that you will watch it. And if people who are listening and are intrigued even a little will watch it, it's very entertaining. And for me, it was life-changing. But it just, I kept feeling very drawn to doing this. I loved the idea of just setting off. I would say leaving my phone behind, but I didn't, because I downloaded apps that help me find my way, although there are markers as you walk that help you find your way. But there are apps that were helpful, and lots of reasons why a phone was just a safety measure. But, just my cell phone didn't ring with phone calls. It was texts home. And it really was just a way of stepping back from normal, hectic real life. And I heard some people use the expression pressing the reset button. It wasn't really a spiritual retreat for me, but there were elements that were involved in that. Right. So I can't really tell you. And even now, 5 years later, I went in August and September of 2017. So, just about, give or take, 5 years. I still don't know exactly why I went, but I know that it changed me fundamentally as a person, and it was probably the best single thing I've ever done for myself. So no, you're right. Not really a vacation, but a fabulous journey still, all in all.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you say that. It's almost like walking that 500 miles was a form of self-care, where we always think of, a bath but really having that time and putting yourself through that challenge seemed to be a form of self-care for you. It
really was. I mean, I was at one of the best times in my life. I mean, I've had health problems. I've had all the problems that most people have, ups and downs, but I wasn't at that point in my life. I was in a happy, stable relationship, great relationships with my grown kids, a growing passel of grandkids, successful business. My health was back. I just felt really lucky. I didn't feel like I needed to go to process anything or deal with this, but I felt like it was a Camino of gratitude. Mm-hmm. I used to use that phrase that
I love that.
People were like, why are you doing this? I was like, I wish I could tell you. I'm just drawn to it and not really looking to get anything out of it. I'm actually looking to just spend time meditating on how grateful I am and how lucky I feel. Yeah. And that was really my only goal. But a whole lot more was revealed on the way. And then after returning home, there've been a lot of realizations that I think I would not have come to had it not been for that time on the road. But self-care, maybe extreme self-care, but yes, that's a good way of describing it.
That's cool. So you had 500 miles. How long did it take you? Like, how did you plan out this time?
Mm-hmm. Well, That's a great question. And one of the things I decided early was that I was going to do this alone, even though I'm pretty much of a social person and I don't really opt. I'm not a loner. I would typically want to go in a group, but I decided that I wanted to kind of map this out in every way based on my needs, which is something I've never been particularly good at. Got the classic disease to please, and I'm always trying to keep up with the person that's going fastest. And I was like, no, not this time. I want to follow my gut. I want to do what makes sense to me. And I'm going to just plot this out as it makes sense. So it ended up being about 40 days that I walked. Started out walking about 15 to 20 miles a day. Then I would take a rest day when I felt like it. One thing I would do differently is I would have left my trip open-ended. Now, I was still working at the time, and so to be able to carve out this amount of time was a real testimony to the partners I was working with and my clients. Everybody was supportive of me to allow me this time.
Right.
So I not only made my trip over there reservations, but I also knew exactly the day that I would be coming home. Mm-hmm. So I did have to kind of keep that in the back of my mind. And I was looking at the calendar constantly and making sure that I was making good enough time to make that flight out of Santiago Airport. So I would have given myself a bit more flexibility, but I allowed about 40 days. Some people do it much faster. Mm-hmm. And I imagine there's people that do it more slowly, but that's what was, to me, such a great thing about this trip is that you can start any place you want. You really can. And you can, a lot of people that live in Europe end up doing, like, let's just look at 500 miles as a place to start. They'll do 100 miles one year. Okay. And they'll come back the following year and do the next 100 miles, and they'll do it in 5 installments. That's the way they want to do it.
And that's sort of how some people do the Appalachian Trail, I think, here, is they sort of take that in a chunk. So that's really cool that it's not a definitive thing you have of how you have to do it. It's very organic and open-ended of how each pilgrim wants to go and define that trip. Right. And that was important, really important for me, which I didn't realize how important that would be. My gut was, do this by yourself. Mm-hmm. But then as I started walking and I watched these hikers just fly by me, with their poles going a mile a minute and, greet you. But wow, then all of a sudden they were just a cloud of dust. I was like, no, I really needed to do this at my own pace. Yeah, absolutely. So you can definitely do that. And so how did you prepare for this trip before going over?
Well, I did train. I learned en route that I should have trained even more, especially on hills, because I thought that walking 5 to 8 miles a day, or most days of the week, over various terrains was plenty, but it really wasn't. So I wish I had done a little bit more vigorous training. But what I did do really rigorously was shop. I was a great shopper. I tried on, now, when people hike the Appalachian Trail, they wear boots, and that makes sense. Boots would have been nice crossing the Pyrenees Mountains at the beginning, but most of the time people wear a nice, like lightweight trail sneaker. Okay. And so that's, buy one of the, like Merrill or one of the people that makes a good boot and a good solid, support structure. So I tried on dozens of pairs of those, and I was fitted for a backpack. Oh my gosh, I did so much research on backpacks. I went to REI, 3 or 4 times and was measured and fitted and all of that. And then I would fill my backpack and walk with that. I bought a really good set of collapsible walking poles, because those are critical. I mean, especially the type of places that you have to walk. They made all the difference, having the hiking poles. I read all the time. I mean, I'm a big reader anyway, and I typically read fiction and memoirs and all that. Well, I read almost exclusively Camino literature. There's a lot out there by experts that are like guidebook type things. And then there's, there must be hundreds of memoirs, self-published mostly, and articles that people who have walked the way, because that's the short way, instead of just saying Camino de Santiago or the Way of St. James, people talk about the way. So there were all these memoirs about people who have walked, hints, tips, tricks, all of that. I read incessantly for all of that. And again, I tested out the best socks. And one thing that was super helpful was I joined a Facebook group for women on the Camino called Camiga, which is a combination of the Spanish word to walk and the female friend. And that was really helpful because women, it was only open to women. And people would post, don't stay at this particular place. It wasn't clean, or I felt threatened, or, they would put that kind of information up there. There was also a spreadsheet that you could see what women were walking on the Camino and what route, the same dates you were. And there was a safe way to reach those people. And sometimes we met up for coffee or something along the way. And that way you kind of knew somebody who was en route at the same time that you were.
That's so cool.
I thought that was great. I really enjoyed that. And there's also a couple of really important purchases in addition to your gear. There's something called a pilgrim passport that I bought once I arrived. Some people get them ahead of time. But this is basically like a passport that you would, or even if you've ever been to Disney, and I know you have,
few times.
over in the what's that called again? International part of Epcot.
Oh, yeah, the World Showcase.
The World Showcase. I know when we went, my children had a small passport, and every time we went into each of these kiosks or pavilions, it was stamped. And then by the end, they had sort of a souvenir. Well, a pilgrim passport works a little bit like that. You carry it along, and every place you eat or stay, or every little tourist attraction, because there are some along the way, it gets stamped. And then when you go to stay at an inexpensive hostel, which are called albergues, if you stay at one of those, you just have to show your pilgrim passport, and it costs about €5.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of people that are just buzzing in and out of these towns, and they are really not invited to stay at some of the municipal and privately supported places that take care of pilgrims along the way.
Oh, okay.
So you just have to flash your pilgrim passport, and you get a pilgrim's plate for $5, which is a wonderful piled up thing, mostly carbs, of food. You can stay overnight for about $5. So it's not an expensive trip most of the time. You don't have to have it be that. So you not only have a great souvenir of the places you've been, you also have a way to show the hotels and the restaurants that you're eligible.
Right.
And then at the end, if you want to get a Compostela, which is like a diploma, a certificate of completion, they're provided by the Catholic Church, as they have been for 800 years. You have to go to the pilgrim's office in Santiago once you get there and wait because there's usually a lot of people in front of you, but you wait and you wait. You wait for someone who speaks your language, because this is an international phenomenon. There's people from all over the world.
Right.
So you wait, and unfortunately, I only speak English, which is really embarrassing when you're with all these, fully speak 3, 4, 5 languages.
I know.
But that's our American shame, I think. So anyway, I speak English, so I had to wait for the English light to flash. And then I would go over and I would offer my passport, and somebody would look at it and study it and make sure that I, had truly done this thing, ask me a couple questions, and then they would fill out this Compostela with my name in Latin and their name. Yeah, so I have that framed. That's another souvenir that means a lot to me. So I made sure that I had that before I left. And one more thing I did before I left was I purchased a scallop shell, which is the icon, the symbol of the Camino. It goes back, again, these hundreds of years. You can Google scallop shell Camino to read probably 7 or 8 different legends about why that became that. But the one I tend to believe is that sometimes a priest sent you on this pilgrimage. Maybe you killed somebody or something, so he sent you off walking. Well, how could he prove that you actually made it to Compostela? And it's surrounded by beaches up there. It's the northern, it's the second it's the second westernmost point in all of Europe.
Oh, wow. And
it's on the Costa del Muerte, which is Coast of Death, for lots of reasons. So much fascinating stuff. Oh my gosh. I wish we could talk about all of it. But anyway, I think it made sense for the pilgrim to pick up a scallop shell on the beach outside of Santiago so he could bring it back to the priest and say, look, I haven't just been underground for the past 40 days. I actually went there. I did what you told me to do. I worked off my sin. Now I need your absolution. Here's the proof.
Yeah.
But what it is now is you hang it on your backpack, and it kind of is just a way of letting everyone else on the path and the surrounding area know that you are a pilgrim. Mm-hmm. Because you go through big and small cities, and not everyone who's carrying a backpack or looking exhausted is actually a pilgrim. And so having this hanging on your backpack is kind of an icebreaker, and you can just almost always feel free to sit down at a table with others who have backpacks and have the thing on there. So I was happy to have mine as sort of a way to let people know that, I was on the way along with them. So
that's so fascinating. And then it gives you, instant sort of credibility to sit down and have a conversation about the experience with someone else who's on it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Now, you said, you mentioned the hostels, and that's where you slept every night?
I would say about 3 or 4 nights a week, I slept in a hostel, and they were bare bones, communal. Some of them were quite small with 4 to 6 beds. Maybe they were, same sex, where you were only in the area with other women, and community baths. Then there were larger ones that were co-ed, and they were about the same amount of money, but it just depended on how large the place was, how soon you got into town. The smaller ones would get taken up first, and then maybe you would end up on the top bunk of a big hostel. But I did that about 3 or 4 times a week. They also had some kind of low budget hotels that were called refugios, where you had a little more privacy, actually a closing door most of the time. You could sometimes get a private room, not always, but they were a little bit nicer. They were often family run. Sometimes they were just like a family's wing of their house that they didn't need anymore, and they would turn that into a refugio. And then there were some really nice historic places along the way. Some were even on the UNESCO World Heritage Site places, old monasteries that had been converted and were actually kind of luxury. I've splurged on those where they actually had real sheets, like linen sheets.
Ooh.
And whereas
after 15, 20 miles, that felt good.
Oh, yes, maybe. Oh, it's amazing. But some of the sheets in the hostels were paper because, you really had to be careful because the bed bug alert would go out, and people would say, don't stay here, bed bugs last night, this kind of thing. So really we're checking your phone. That's why I just couldn't leave my phone behind. I would check the Camigas group. I would check the app. There were lots of different places for my peers, pilgrim peers, to throw out a example of, hey, don't do this, don't do that. But you knew you were really in the lap of luxury at some of these hotels. And I think I probably did that 3, maybe 4 times, if I'm honest. But that's the door that closes and locks. It's the little perfumes. It's soap. It's it's just like, yeah, I needed this, and I did need that, to kind of keep me going. And I knew when I did. So I slept in a combination of the albergues, traditional hostels, refugios, small hotels, and every now and then the converted monastery or old deconsecrated church where they would now have, private rooms and private baths. And that was beautiful and restorative. But I'm glad I stayed in all of them because I met fascinating people every place, that I paused really along the way.
So that leads me into and I know you had a lot of favorite experiences during the trip, but were there a few that really stand out as favorite experiences?
For me, it was the fact that the Camino became a traveling community. It was like we all were fixated or focused on getting to the same place. And we were proceeding in different ways at different paces. But, it was just very moving to me to think about being part of this wave of people who were all moving towards this goal together. And there was always a lot of sharing, like, oh, I ran out of water, because water's heavy. You don't want to carry a lot of water. And so sometimes you could tell, someone was thirsty and waiting to get to the next town so they could, find some water. And maybe you had some extra, so you passed that on. And people shared all sorts of things, blister prevention tactics. And, it's like, oh, you're not Vaselining your feet. You should be. Here, I've got some, and this is how I do it. Maybe this would help you. So just this whole caring and sharing ideas so that we could all sort of support each other.
Right.
To get there. Some encounters, the people, I have to say, there were people from all over the world. New Zealand and Australia and Israel and South Africa and all over. And sometimes you would just kind of look to your right or your left and someone would, in my case, be passing me. I was like the world's slowest walker, which I had to learn to let go of that because, like I said, I wanted to be keeping up with everything.
You got to turn that competition gene off in that, right?
That's a tough one for me. But someone would walk by and they'd pause a little and the opening questions were always things like, so where did you start from? Because as I said, you can start from anywhere.
Right.
what kind of backpack is that? And, just easy kind of, do you come here often questions,
right.
That people could talk about. But at the end of the day, when people would be at mostly the hostels, the most humble places, and everyone would be doing their laundry because you were only carrying 2 sets of clothes, basically. Okay. Something for on your back and then something, for you to change into the next day. So you really had to keep up with, washing out everything, your socks and those types of things. So we'd all be doing our laundry together, doing our idea. And it was gorgeous weather most of the time. And, someone would put on some music, and I don't know if it reminded me of college or whatever, but it just made me feel young and connected, and I don't know. I loved that. That was the absolute best for me. Was the friendships and the people that I met. I just have to say that was my absolute favorite experience.
I think it's so interesting and so cool that everyone there is doing it for their own reason and at their own speed and from their own, but it's the same goal and it's the same and then which makes it a community, but everyone's sort of doing it in their own way. But I think that's what's so cool about it is that community. Especially when you're saying like people are letting you know which places are safe or which places have this. And that really takes, that for me would take, I get like travel anxiety. So me not knowing not having ratings to look at would drive me crazy. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. And I don't know if you remember, but probably the week before I left for my Camino, which would have made it sometime in mid-August of 2017, there was like a total eclipse of the sun. Mm-hmm. It was a really big deal, and people were making, viewing things and all that. And it wasn't like the typical times when there's partial eclipses. This was a huge, big deal. Right.
And everybody it felt like in the U.S. stopped that day to look up. Mm-hmm. And they were posting on all the social media things. And it was a phenomenon that day. Sure. And I remember thinking how profound it was that, there was just a moment where no phone call, no deadline was more important than stepping outside. Mm-hmm. Kind of shoulder to shoulder, because we weren't social distancing back then. Nobody knew about such things. And looking up and, being like, that is so cool. And so as I walked on the Camino with my eye towards Santiago, I thought of that. I thought of how powerful it is to be with a group who all have a similar goal. Mm-hmm. And just share that with people. We don't do that enough, Yeah. We really don't. So that aspect of it was a big part of the joy of all of it for me.
So I'm as the person who's always worried about where their next meal's coming when they're on vacation, or any time for that matter. Did you have like a favorite meal or food on the way?
Well, I did walk at the end of harvest season in August and September. And this was, the breadbasket of northern Spain. And so you were walking through farmlands. If you're a wine drinker, and I think you are, I'm not, but is it Rioja wines? They're very famous Spanish wines. So we were walking through the vineyards a lot, and, a lot of the vintners would come out and basically pour like a flight of wine, and you could just walk by like the Boston Marathon grabbing water. You could just grab your wine and drink. As I said, I didn't do that, but it was kind of fun to watch people do that. But I am a huge olive eater. I love olives, and olives grow as well in this area. So they were fresh and abundant. And then just all the produce that would be available. We always had huge salads, varied and delicious. And there's a special part, dessert, I guess. It's called, it's basically a Santiago tart, and it's almonds, which is another thing that is quite popular. It was like an almond tart and the coffee was fabulous as well. So you can imagine, finishing a meal like that was luxurious every day too. So you never had a choice, which was good, because I don't like making choices. Right. I don't like that. So it was kind of like whatever, the person in charge of the kitchen was making that day. You, for €5, would get a bowl of it or a plate of it or whatever. And there was very little I didn't enjoy. I discovered white asparagus, which I didn't know existed, but that was delicious. The only food that was not my favorite was something called pulpo, Pulpo, which is Spanish for octopus.
Yep. Nope.
Yep. Well, I felt like I needed to try it because it was, again, a communal experience. Right. The pulpo houses had great big communal tables where you came in and sat down, mostly pilgrims, but not all. And they would serve you this big bowl of octopus in broth. And it was pretty chewy. I'm not a calamari person.
Yeah, I'm not either. So
I took a bite, and there's a picture of me taking a bite with the worst expression ever, which my grandkids think is funny. But, I did want to try it. And then they had wonderful homemade bread, and the broth wasn't too bad. So between the broth and the bread, I was able to get a meal that night. But glad I tried it. But no, not a fan. Not
going back for it.
Not going back. No, I wasn't. But between all I would rather eat vegetables and fruits than almost anything else. And so the fact that was so abundant and fresh and usually picked out of the family who was running the refugio or whatever from their garden or something, it was just fine. So that was probably my favorite.
And the good thing is, walking 15 to 20 miles a day, you can eat whatever and however much you want, because the calories you're burning in that day is... Yeah,
that's true. That was a new experience, to not really worry about any of that. So I didn't bring my Fitbit. I didn't bring anything. A lot of people did, like how many steps am I taking or any of that. I just didn't do it. I just walked, and that was my only job, really, for 40 days, was to get up and walk and do whatever I had to do to support that,
What would you say was either you... I'm going to change the question that I originally sent you. What would you say was the hardest part of the trip? The thing that you just, you didn't like, or it was just the biggest struggle? Because I would imagine 40 days of this, there were several. At least I know I would have had probably 40 struggles.
Yeah. Well, I definitely had. And like the answer to some questions, the best thing about the trip was also the worst thing about the trip. I did it alone, which gave me confidence that I had never had in my life. Since then, it gave me the courage, having completed the Camino, gave me confidence that I've never had in my life, and allowed me to take on things and say yes to things that I never thought I would be capable of doing. So it was critical that I go alone. But the worst part of it was I was alone. And I missed my husband and my children and their spouses and my grandchildren and my friends, because I was meeting new people every day, but there was no familiarity. Nobody that I just felt knows me from the inside out, that I just can completely be myself with. It was kind of that always on feeling that you
right.
get.
Like a constant networking event.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good way of putting it. Yes. And there really were conversations might start casually, but for some reason, because we were all sharing this like profound experience, they went to really deep, really fast. It might start with, okay, what city did you start from? And what kind of backpack is that? To why did you decide to walk, Pilgrim? Pilgrim, why do you walk? And it's like, well, I tend to be pretty much of an open book, so I would feel like I wanted to share that information. And by this time, some things were sort of coming out, and I was talking to people, and then I was listening to what they were telling me. Mm-hmm. And quite often, they were processing life transitions, the death of a lifelong partner, divorce, some other kind of change that maybe they wanted or maybe they didn't want, an illness. One of the women from Australia that I would walk with for a little while and then would lose each other, and then I'd see her again, a few miles down the road. She was walking the Camino for her father, who had recently passed away and always wanted to do it. So she had a small vial of his ashes that she was leaving a little bit at each place, and that was extremely heartbreaking for her and exhilarating in some ways, I guess, to be able to do this. But, you're absorbing that from other people. You're not just talking about what you are doing and feeling. You're also, it's a privilege to hear what they're doing and feeling. And so it was exhausting sometimes. And then to make matters worse, I tore my plantar fascia on my left foot about 2/3 of the way there. Just too much walking, and it was extremely painful. Could not get my shoe on, had to rest, and lost some time. So what I did was I even hopped on a bus or stuck my thumb out a time or two and got a ride. These were deep on the Camino. So I felt like, me, and that I'm not a particularly risk-taking person, but it felt okay. So I don't tell people I walked every single step. I did not. I had to, because I had that end date, that hard end where I had to get on the airplane. I had to make up a little bit of time. Yeah. So, I would hop on a bus or, just take a, like I said, a cab, or a local woman one day was bringing her kids to school and she picked me up and took me, a few miles. So, you make your way. That's what I say. I try to use that phrase, made my way on the Camino, because I'm not trying to tell anybody that I walked every inch of 500 miles. I had to, use some workarounds. I won't say cheat. I had to use a little workarounds because, I was hurt, and
injury and time definitely will affect how you have to make that way. Yeah,
and it took me probably a year to completely recover from that. Wow. Once I got back to the U.S., I went to several, podiatrists and reflexologists and all sorts of people to try to help me. And it basically just was overuse, especially for me, since even though I thought I was training properly, I really needed to have been walking for longer. I probably walked 3 or 4 months in advance of training, and probably should have done it a lot more, but hey, it was the first time, I know I made a lot of mistakes.
It's still remarkable to me. You mentioned that you learned confidence from your trip. Is there anything else you learned about yourself during the trip or after the trip, like you said?
I guess one of the things that crossed my mind a lot while I was walking is the metaphor that life is a road. Mm-hmm. Life is a road. I mean, there's songs and there's poems and, the road not taken and life is a highway and all the, I mean, it is. And what you have to do is just keep going and don't stop and adjust when you need to. And like the Disney character Dory says in the movie, what is that one? Help me. Little Mermaid.
Finding Nemo.
Finding Nemo. She says, just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. And so I learned that that's what I needed to do, and that I didn't always need to have answers right away, that I could reach out to other people, that life wasn't really this big competition that I always thought it was, that I could be the last one into town each night and still be proud of myself. And so I think I came home a less competitive person. And that was a big change for me. That like you said, that competitive gene that had always driven me, I left that somewhere along the way. I just buried it and let it go.
I think that's, those two things alone would be worth the trip for sure.
And I didn't know that's where I was going. Like I said, I thought I was just going to be thankful, just be, and I spent a lot of time being grateful. And I'm telling you what, when I got home, I flew into Dulles Airport and limped my way, to where my husband was meeting me. And it was just like, I have come home to this special paradise. I mean, it's like, I've got somebody in my life who knows me inside and out, that I don't have to introduce myself to, that I don't have to talk about anything that I don't want to talk about. And there'll be real sheets on my bed. And I mean, it was like every day was Christmas for like a year later. It was like, I could not believe just all the comforts that we have here and that we take for granted, and just all the people in my life. And I mean, I just really unleashed this tremendous tsunami of gratitude in me that I think I still have. I think I used to be a little bit, I don't know, sometimes maybe just not as grateful as I should be, thinking about what I didn't have instead of what I did have, it did change me. So I'm grateful for that.
That's great. I think I don't know. I remember when you first went on the trip and we had coffee afterwards and you talking about it. And it's just one of those, like, it just was so interesting to me. So when I decided to do this podcast, I'm like, I have got to get Joanne to talk about it because I think these kind of things if we talk about the miles or stuff, but it's so much more. And I think anytime, like almost everywhere I travel, when I come home, I have that gratitude I love to travel, but I love coming home and having that gratitude of home and, everything that means. So I love that's, that it lasted for so long. 'Cause, you come home, you get caught up in life again and you're sort of like, but for it to be that profound is so cool.
Yeah, there still are echoes that I feel. And I've always been a light traveler. I don't bring a lot of stuff with me. Mm-hmm. But if there's one thing I learned on Camino is how little you actually need to be happy.
Right.
So it took a few years once I got home, but I began talking to my husband about downsizing. How important is it for us to still have all this room? Is it still necessary? I mean, yeah, it's nice to have on Thanksgiving when we have a big gang of people, and it is kind of fun to have the extra bedrooms when the grandkids come to visit. But, my grandkids sleep in recliner chairs, on the floor, wherever they land. They don't really care.
Right.
And I thought, what am I dragging all this house around for when we really don't need it? And there's so much extra stuff. So it didn't happen the month, the week, or even the year following my Camino, but we really began downsizing and minimizing and have moved into, a condo that is plenty comfortable for our needs, and rehomed a ton of stuff. And so I feel like I've simplified my life tremendously, because I lived for 40 days with, 3 pairs of socks and, a couple of other things that I could rinse out. And, my skin never looked better. And I had one bar of soap that was, it's been 5 years. Forgive me, I can't remember. But it was a shampoo and a body wash and everything else. And it was like a little thing of soap. And that's what I had. And I didn't have all these fancy anti-aging products, and I was never healthier, and I felt like, except for the pain I was in from that like half broken foot, I felt like there was a sense of well-being from that simplicity and that time. And so my life today is a whole lot simpler, and I like that. So
I love everything about that. So and I really appreciate you sharing both the logistics and the what it meant to you to go on that trip, and opening up about that. So now I'm going to sort of shift gears and throw a few of my end of interview rapid fire questions at you.
Okay.
That are definitely not serious at all, but I think important. Like, what is your favorite road trip snack?
Oh, I'm going to just say an apple.
Okay.
You don't have to wrap it. You don't have to keep it at a certain temperature. It's nutritious. It's good soluble fiber, all those things. So I'm just going to say a boring little apple, Honey Crisp if I can get it.
An apple is never boring. I have one every day at lunch. So
there you go. Yeah. And Panera gives us one as a side. So, they're believers too. So, yeah, I'd have to say that's probably the one I pack most often.
Gotcha. And what is your next planned trip? Where are you heading next?
We are heading out to Colorado.
Cool.
Yeah, we in September we did a train trip out west, and maybe we can chat about this another time, but we went to 9 national parks at that time. We went to Utah and Montana and a lot of national parks, which kind of made us think, oh, let's go to all of them. Why don't we try to visit them all? So we have a granddaughter who plays at a high level of competitive softball, and she has a tournament in Colorado. So we're going out there and we'll be watching some games, but when we're not watching games, we're going to go to Rocky Mountain National Park. Estes Park is not a national park, but it's still fabulous. I went there years ago, and may try our hand at fly fishing or some outdoor activities like that. Yeah. So that's the last 2 weeks in June.
Sounds good. Do you have a dream trip that you want to take?
I think I have 2 that I go back and forth between. There is we used to do all our traveling on our own. We never went with a group or had some, professional guidance or anything, but we are finding we've gone on a couple in our later years where we've kind of liked having someone else do the driving. So neither one of us has to be the one keeping their eyes on the road while fantastic stuff is happening out the window.
Exactly.
So we went on a Viking trip one time, a river cruise to the south of France that we loved, and we dream of going back to I think they call it the Grand European Tour. It's the one that they use the clips from if you ever see an advertisement for their trips, with the castles and everything. And you go through Budapest and I don't know, all those like places along the Rhine River. That just looks like a great bang for the buck trip. I know it's not inexpensive, but you see so much in the time. So we think about that, but then I know it's a very long plane trip, but I would love to go to Australia and spend like a month because it's such a big place.
Yeah. You
really do have to allow a lot of time, and probably would get a little professional travel agent support for that one too. And I could meet up with so many of my Camino friends. I met like 10 or 12 people who live in various places of Australia that have, of course, invited me and would be happy to host my husband, I think, as well. So that would be fun. So yeah, I kind of go back and forth between the Grand European Tour and Down Under. So I don't know. Maybe both.
I was going to say, both sound incredible. So what is your favorite trip you've taken?
Favorite trip? Wow. I'm going to say Italy because that was the first trip we took with a travel agent. And we ended up going into Milan and then going up to the Lake Como area near Switzerland, came down through Tuscany, then down through central Italy, ended up on the coast, Positano and the Amalfi coast, and then backtracked up to Rome and did all that classic Roman stuff for 3 days. So we were gone for about 2 weeks.
Nice.
And that was fantastic. That was just so many beautiful, beautiful things. Especially the coast, I would think. Positano and Amalfi were just gorgeous. I've never been across to Sicily. I wish we had been, but we'll just hopefully get a chance to go back. But that, I think, was one of my favorites. I'll have to qualify it and say that was one of my favorites, but absolutely loved Italy.
Sicily is incredible. Just don't go in July.
Because it's hotter.
We were very hot, yes.
Oh, I bet.
And we were staying with family, so there was no air conditioning, and the house wasn't quite on an angle to get the breeze. So our poor little air-conditioned American lives were pretty...
I bet, yeah.
But it was worth the food and the people and everything else was worth it. But I was like, I'll come back in the fall. Like I've decided... That'll be my timing for anything in Sicily.
Yeah.
You don't realize how far south it is.
Yeah. Oh.
Do you have a favorite travel tip to share with us?
I just can't stress enough how important it is to travel light. I mean, I pack my suitcase and then I take half the stuff out because you're not going to need it.
Right.
And if you do need it, you'd be amazed how you can find it somewhere. I often I'm telling you two things now, because this is one of my favorite topics too, is try not to bring an item that can only provide one use. Like, don't bring a bathing suit cover up that doesn't double as a nightgown if you need it to. And, bring a light thing, a light shawl that could also be a blanket or a beach towel if you needed it to. So really try to make the items in your suitcase do double, triple duty if you can. And don't go crazy with shoes. They are heavy and, really be careful with that. So travel light, and then there's like a whole bunch of little tips that come out of that. But really, you're going to come home, think about it. How many times have you come home with half the stuff in your suitcase, never worn, never touched? So
I am definitely trying to improve on that. I pack layers because I never know if I'm going to be hot or cold, and I need to be better about not needing or just reusing that, like multitasking with stuff, like you're saying.
Yes, and here's the thing. There are laundromats in every town.
I know.
There are, and we enjoy actually going to them because you're going to meet the real people doing their laundry.
True.
And so why not?
And depending where you are, you might get an invitation for dinner. So
that's what I'm talking about. Or a really good hint about someplace. Oh, have you been here? You should go here. So yeah, you can do laundry. And it took me years to figure that out. I also try to bring stuff that's fast drying. There's a lot of these, the brand that Duluth Trading has is called Armachillo, I think. And it's thin, lightweight, and you can basically swish it in the sink with a little soap, squeeze out the extra moisture in a towel, and then it'll be ready for you the next morning. So try to look for those, on the travel clothing sites like Magellan. Try to find some quick, like there's like camisoles and underwear and those kind of things that are very easy to wash and wear like that. So that's definitely something I try to do too.
Very good. And this has become more interesting topic than I thought with people so far. Do you fold or roll your clothing when you pack them?
I'm a roller, baby. I roll. Yeah. And I use packing cubes too.
I'm hearing that more and more. I finally used them on this past trip to California, and just from keeping my stuff organized, even it was game changing for me. So I am a new convert on the packing cube for sure.
Yep.
And all right. So what or who is on your travel playlist?
Well, that's a great question because music is a huge part of any trip for me. And I really overdo it because I try to decide what music goes with the trip we're going to. So if we're going to be floating down, a river in the south of France, I'm going to want some French music, some Edith Piaf, some La Vie en Rose, and, little fancy things like that. And Spotify will give me all kinds of great ideas. Like, ooh, if you're listening to that, you should listen to this and put this on your playlist. So then I end up with music that kind of goes with the territory. And when we were taking the train across the heartland of America, I listened to Fanfare for the Common Man by Aaron Copland, and what else did I put on there? Oh, the soundtrack from Dances with Wolves. And that was just, I did not see, unfortunately, herds of buffalo like John Dunbar did in the movie, but it was just all about open space, and it was this perfect score to listen to that.
I love that you theme your music to your trip.
I do.
That's amazing. I love that so much.
Kind of crazy, but
no, it's not.
Of course, I do have my favorites, but I do, and I throw those in there too. But we do try to create a score based on what we're actually doing that kind of complements or creates an ambiance to where we're going.
Yeah.
I love the preparation part. I love the shopping. I love the planning. I love the reading beforehand. And I love creating the playlists. It helps me wait for Wheels Up when it's time to go. I get so excited, and this fills the time in between trips.
I love that. Well, again, I want to thank you for your time and sharing, again, I said like the information as well as sort of the heart story of that trip. It's so inspiring. Not enough that I'm going to go do it, but I'm not sure my legs can hold me up for that long. I could maybe do the 100 miles a year. Like that's something I can look at, but I hats off to you for the full walk. But like I said, I thank you so much for your time, and I know everyone's going to enjoy it. I'm going to put a lot of the resources that you shared with me. I'll put them in the show notes for everyone. So
sure, absolutely. When I said it was one of my favorite topics, I was not kidding. And it's been a while. It's been 5 years. So this really kind of reignited my joy for the experience. And I've thought about writing the 956th book out there on the Camino, from my point of view, just some things that I learned, right. And just talking to you made me think, well, maybe I'll do that. Who knows?
Well, I think the listeners will want that. So go for that.
We'll see. All right.
Anyway, well, thanks for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
If you're planning to take on the Camino, please check out our website, CaminoFM.com, for the latest news and advice. This is Camino FM Talk Radio.